salted caramel apple pie.
Yep. All right, so there's several components to this one. The first is the pie crust. So we've done that a few times in other videos. So we're just gonna go through this really quick. If you need extra help on that, go back and watch the Pop-Tart video or the empanadas video. But we're doing that 3-2-1 pie crust again. So I've got 9 ounces of flour, a teaspoon of salt, 6 ounces of shortening. And then once we get that cut in a minute, we're gonna add 3 ounces of cold water. And then we're gonna divide it into 2 pieces, roll it out between parchment paper, and get that chilled so we're ready to use it for our pie. Okay, I just started rolling out my bottom pie crust. So I divided my dough after we got everything mixed together. Made the one ball that we're going to use for the bottom crust just a little bit bigger than the top. We don't need quite as much for the top of our pie. And I do want to try to keep this as a circle. So I'm rolling between parchment paper today. I'm also using just a little bit of flour. We don't want to get carried away with it. But you do want to check every once in a while that your parchment paper isn't really stuck to your pie crust. It should pull off pretty clean once it's cold, but we just want to help make sure that that's not going to stick for us. The other thing that you want to do is keep rolling this out until you get to a diameter that's bigger than your pie pan that you're using. So it needs to be bigger than the bottom, but we also have to go up the side. So I also need to go out a couple of inches past where the bottom of my pie plate is. So we're going to keep rolling it out until we get to that size, and then we're going to chill these. Both of my pie crusts are rolled out now. I've got one for the bottom and one for the top. We're gonna put these in the fridge and chill them until they're completely cold. And while we're doing that, we will work on the other components of our pie. Next, I'm gonna work on the salted caramel sauce. You could definitely make the apple pie without it, but this just adds something a little bit extra to it. So I'm gonna use a saucepan and I'm going to put in a cup of sugar and half a cup of water. You can make caramel or you're making a candy is what you're doing without water, but it does take longer to cook that way. But the water does help, especially if you're not very experienced in making a candy or a caramel. And then I'm gonna add some salt. The recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons. This is a salted caramel, so it should have a salty flavor to it. But I'm gonna be using salted butter in a minute, and so I cut that amount in half. So I'm using about 3/4 of a teaspoon, so it's not too salty. So I'm going to turn my heat up to medium high, and I want to stir this until all of the sugar dissolves. Okay. Once the sugar dissolves, we're going to stop stirring it. We want to try to be really careful to not get sugar crystals up on the side because that will cause our caramel to crystallize, meaning it'll get grainy after it starts to cool off. So we're trying to get all of the sugar dissolved. It's not going to dissolve right away. You have to add heat to that, and that's going to take just a little bit of time. And once that is all dissolved, then we're going to stop stirring, and we're just going to let it start changing to an amber color, which will be the color of our caramel. You can also, it's a good idea to have, we'll get a little bit more water in a minute, have a pastry brush, and you can use that pastry brush to brush down the sides of the pan if your sugar crystals that get on it, to make sure that we get all of those off. Now that my sugar is dissolved and my liquid is boiling, I'm going to turn my heat down to medium heat. I do not want to stir it anymore, so we're just going to let it be, but I do want to continue to use that pastry brush and just make sure that the edges stay clean and I don't have any crystallization start happening on the edges. So this is going to have to cook for a little bit depending on your pan and your stove, your heat, all of that type of stuff. This could take up to 15 minutes, but what I want to see happening is I want it to start caramelizing, which means it's going to turn an amber color. And you have some options. You definitely don't want to burn it, so be paying attention, don't walk away from it. you'll start to see that color change happening. And if there's a hot spot in your pan or on your burner, it might start happening on one side before it does the other. Once it gets to that point, or at any point, you're welcome to pick it up and just gently kind of move it around like that. But you do not want to stir it with anything. Okay, and it's kind of your preference. You can make this a lighter color, caramel. You can let it go a little bit longer to where it gets a little bit deeper color. But just don't let it burn. I mean, if you start seeing that dark amber color and it starts turning really dark, then we need to go ahead and get it off the heat. The other thing that will help stop that cooking process faster is having your butter and your cream ready to go. So as soon as that gets the color you want, you can put that those other ingredients in, and that will help stop the cooking process. This is very, very hot liquid sugar at this point, so you do want to be very careful that you don't spill it on yourself. So we're just going to keep cooking this, and we'll keep an eye on looking for that amber color, and then we'll add our butter and cream in at the very end. As you get closer to the sugar mixture changing to an amber color, you're going to start to notice that the bubbles get bigger and they pop a little bit slower. So those are going to keep getting bigger and then they'll kind of go away. Just going to gently swirl that. It can help you kind of be checking for color as well. But we're getting pretty close at this point. All right, we're starting to get a really light amber color right now. You can see it's not clear anymore. It's just starting to pick up just a little bit of a yellow color. So it's a good idea at this point to just every so often just kind of pick it up and swirl that around just a little bit. So like I said earlier, especially if you have a hot spot in your pan or from your stove top, you can start to have one side change faster than the rest. And if you're not paying attention, you can get that kind of burnt flavor. Well, it'll carry throughout all of it. So we just want to keep watching this. If we were to take it off right now, you would have a very, very light caramel, and it wouldn't have much of a caramel flavor. So we're going to keep going. I have my 6 ounces of butter ready to go. It's already cut up into some smaller pats of butter. So that'd be a stick and a half, and then I have 2 tablespoons of cream. So as soon as I want this to stop cooking, I'm going to take it off the heat, and I'm going to immediately get that put in there to stop it from cooking anymore. It is going to steam a lot, so you want to be careful when you put that in there that you don't burn yourself. And we are really, really close on this. You can see it's continuing to get darker. You'll also start to smell it. It'll start to change smells. You can see those bubbles are starting to go away. We're getting just changing. If you notice anything starting to smell burnt, you definitely need to take it off. We do not want it to burn. We're going to see if we can get this just a tiny bit darker. And remember, this is very, very hot sugar that will stick to you, so be really careful as you're working with it. You do not want to spill this on yourself. All right, I think we are pretty much there. So I'm going to turn my heat off. And we're going to go ahead and add in our butter. And it's going to bubble up and it's going to melt. That's exactly what we want it to do. And then we're going to add in 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. And then we're just going to keep stirring this until it all comes together. It'll be a lot softer caramel. If you would have not put that the butter and the cream in, that caramel would have gotten very hard because you went to the hard crack stage on the sugar. And so if you don't put the butter or the cream in, it won't be a soft caramel. It would be a hard caramel, and it would get stuck in your pan if you didn't pull it out. All right, so we're just gonna keep stirring that up until it all comes together. And then our caramel is gonna be ready to go. Next, we're gonna get our apples ready. So I'm using a Pink Lady apple. It's more of a tart apple. You could also use Granny Smith. You do want to choose a tartar apple though. We're gonna add sugar to make the pie sweet. So the same thing we've talked about with chocolate. If you have a more tart or more bitter, you're gonna actually taste that flavor more. So like with our bitter chocolate, you're gonna taste that more when you add something sweet in the recipe. Same thing with our apples. If we used a really sweet apple, we would lose the apple flavor, and we wanna make sure it tastes like apples. So we're gonna use Pink Lady. You can also use a combination and mix it up with some different apples. So we have an apple peeler core slicer, and it's amazing for stuff like this. If you don't have one of these, then you can peel them with a vegetable peeler, and then just cut off all of the planks, and then just cut it down into slices. It just takes a little bit longer. These are really nice because it's gonna do all of that for me very quickly. So we just put the apple onto the 3 prongs, and then we can move it forward a little bit. And this is always the best part, isn't it? Mm-hmm. They're also really fun to eat like this, just for a snack. But it cuts it, and it cuts it into like a little slinky. But all I have to do now is cut through it once, and I'll have perfect apple slices. It's peeled for me. The core is taken out, and then I just keep repeating that through all of them. So you need about 6 large apples for this. Mine are a little bit on the smaller side, so I'm going to use 7. So we're going to get all of our apples cut up. All of our apple pieces are ready to go, so they are just little half thin slices, so that's what we want. We've got a big bowl. It's going to be easier to stir in that way. We want to get the mixture that's going to go on our apples ready. So I have 1/4 of a cup of flour that's going to help thicken up the juices that come out of the apples. And then I have 1/2 a cup of turbinado sugar. It normally comes in a box like this. It's a larger sugar crystal. It's got kind of a golden color to it. If you're not able to get that, you can just use regular sugar for that. But we're gonna use 1/2 a cup of that. And then you've got some different spices to add. We definitely wanna get some cinnamon in there. So if you follow the recipe as is, you need 1/2 a teaspoon of cinnamon. We do have extra flavors with this recipe because if you do the caramel, so we don't want it to get too overwhelming with spices, but you could play around with these a little bit, especially if you're not using the caramel. We're using 1/4 of a teaspoon of allspice. Allspice just has it's a spice mixture. So we're gonna use 1/4 of a teaspoon of that one, and then 1/4 of a teaspoon of cardamom. And that one just adds a really distinctive kind of flavor to it. All right, so it smells really good too. So 1/4 of a teaspoon of that. We're gonna stir all of that together. Make sure it's all mixed in, and then we're gonna toss that into on our apples and make sure that it's all mixed together. And then we need to get our pie crust rolled out and ready to go. Okay, so that's all mixed. I'm gonna pour that over, spilled it. Pour that over our apples, and then just stir that up to where all of that is covered, and then our apples are gonna be ready to go in our pie. Oh, you wanna stir it? Is that what you were asking me? I can't tell what you were saying behind the camera. You got it all stirred up?
I can smell the spices and sugar.
And at this point, your caramel is probably cool enough to try. Ryan and Adeline, we just both did an extra apple for them because they like them sliced that way, and they both snuck a little dip in the caramel. Was it good?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get all that stirred up, and then we're ready to get our pie crust put in our pan, right? Get it all assembled. All right. Looks good. Good job. Okay, we're gonna put our pie crust into our pie plate. So just gonna peel the parchment paper off on both sides to make sure that that's not stuck. And if we rolled it big enough, we're gonna take our pie plate and we can gently set that down on our crust. Slide it off so you can get your hand in it. I like flipping them that way. It's a lot easier. If you don't have parchment paper, some people will roll the pie crust out on a counter, floured counter, and then roll it up on a rolling pin. You can do that too. You just normally have a little bit more success with this, especially if you're not as experienced with pie crust. So then we're going to gently pull that off. Awesome. Okay. And so from there, we want to just gently kind of lift up the edges, make sure that that pie crust is all the way down into that bottom edge of the pan. And we want to have some overlap like we have, so that's a good thing. You want to cut it? Yeah. Okay. And we are going to trim just a little bit off. We want to keep a little bit of a border there, but like right here I've got quite a bit, so we'll cut that.
Right here.
Yep, a little bit further out. Right there. Yep. So we're just using some kitchen shears and just trimming off some of our excess pie crust. And we'll save that. You can still use that. We're going to do some decorations on the top of the pie here in a little bit. But having this overlap is going to help us make sure we can build up a really nice pretty edge. Cut it a little higher, like right here. Ryan just got that trimmed up, so we've got just a little bit of an overhang there on our pie crust. And our oven is saying it's preheated. We want our oven preheated to 400 for here in just a minute. We are going to save our extra pie crust, so we're going to roll that out here again in a second. I want to make sure I keep this really cold. That's going to help with that flakiness that we've talked about before. So I'm going to put this in the freezer. You could also put it in the refrigerator. Just while we're working on our top piece and getting it ready so it's nice and cold. You also want to make sure at this point that you don't have any holes in your pie crust. We don't want anything leaking out of it. While the bottom of the crust is chilling, we're going to work on the top one for just a second. So we're going to go ahead and get that parchment paper pulled off. And then we're going to flip it, peel it off to the other side as well. So we want to have some vents in the top of our pie crust so that way the steam can escape, otherwise it'll make its own holes and it won't be as pretty. Oh, got a little sticky. There we go. Okay. And so I have, this is big enough to fit on top of my pie right now. I'm going to go ahead, I know where the center is at. And then you can use, if you've got little shapes, like you could use a small star. We've done that for 4th of July before. You can use the bottom of a decorating tip. Hang on just a second. And just cut out some vents. And then we're going to save those little pieces we cut out too, because we can also put those back on top of our pie and add more decoration to it. You could also just get this put on your pie and then put a few slits in it. That would be fine too. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. But we want to just get some of those vents put in. Alright, so Ryan just cut out, he got 5 little circles cut out right there, starting in the middle, and we saved those little pieces. We're going to put those back on top here in just a little bit. And I need to start assembling my pie now. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this back on the sheet pan, and I'm going to put it either freezer or refrigerator. Let it chill back down while we're getting everything else put in the bottom of our pie, and then we'll pull it back out. Sound good? Our bottom crust has been chilled down a little bit more. We're going to start putting our apples in now. So when we put these in, we want to make sure, go ahead and start. You want to make sure that you have a bottom layer where all of the apples completely overlap. We don't want any apples or any holes in there, because we're going to put, if you made the caramel, we're going to put that caramel on top, and we want to try to keep the caramel in the apples. And to not get down and stuck on the bottom of the pie crust. So we're going to just kind of put these in by hand for just a second and try to make sure that we really get these packed in there. Your apples, right, if you're using the caramel or not, your apples are also going to get smaller. They're going to shrink as they cook, and so I'm going to hang on just a second. Let's get that right there. As the moisture comes out of them, they're going to decompress. They're going to get smaller. So you do want to make sure that we get those packed in there tightly. so that way, there's some skin. So that way you don't end up with your top kind of sunken down when we have get our top put on later. So once you get that, then we can go ahead and just kind of keep going with that. And this is going to mound up a little bit. Just like I said, it's going to shrink back down. Those apples are going to shrink and start cooking. And depending on the size of pie plate that you're using, it might be a little more mounded than others. Some pie plates are a little bit deeper. And if that's the case, then you may have to play around with how much crust you use too.
That's a lot.
Okay, we're gonna add 1/4 of a cup of our caramel, and we wanna, Jesus, just kind of drizzle it all over the top of it. So we're not gonna put a lot on the actual apples as it's baking. We're gonna get just 1/4 of a cup put in there. That's gonna help give it some of that flavor mixed in, but then we're also gonna use the rest when we serve it, and we'll put a really nice drizzle over the top as we serve that. Yes, you wanna eat it with some ice cream, don't you? Best way to eat apple pie, huh? Can I help get the sauce a little bit out? Okay, and just try to, your caramel, if you've let it cool off like ours is, it's definitely gotten thicker. So you just want to try to make sure that you're getting that evenly distributed over the top of the pie, because we don't want to have all of it in one spot and then it not be in any of the rest. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Okay. We're ready to put the top on. So another nice thing about using parchment paper is it makes this process just a little bit easier. So since I have a center of that, I want to try my best to get that to the center of the pie. Make sure that that's all covering, and then we're going to gently peel that off. One second. Stuck right there. Okay. And then we're ready to start working on our edges. Okay. So since that top is on now, we just want to do the kind of that same thing we did to the bottom a minute ago. We're going to go around with a pair of kitchen shears. You can also use a paring knife if you don't have a kitchen shears, but we want to try to get that to match where our bottom layer was at. And then we're going to be ready to form our edge of the pie. Okay. So we've got all that trimmed up. What I want to do now, we want to make sure that these stay together and keep the juices in the pie. So you should have those two layers should be matching. And we can just go around and pinch those together just a little bit to help make sure. You can also do an egg wash on the bottom before you add the top to it. But I'm going to take that and I'm just going to kind of roll that over a little bit and then pinch that together. And we're going to do that around the whole pie. And we're going to get that edge built up first, and then we'll go back and we'll do a little crimp on it just to make it look a little bit nicer. Okay, we have the nice built up edge all the way around our pie now. So I want to add a little crimp to it just to make it look a little bit nicer. And this is one of the easiest ways you can do an edge on a pie crust. There's all kinds of ways you can do a pie crust edge, but this is one of the easiest. So I'm going to use 2 fingers. You can go like this, you can pinch it, but we're just going to go around the pie and just give it a really nice, pretty crimped edge all the way around the pie. Last step before we put the pie in the oven, we're going to use an egg wash. So this egg wash is just 1 whole egg scrambled up really well to where it all looks the same. We're going to use a pastry brush again. We don't want to have too much excess, but we're just going to lightly brush all over the top of the pie. And then, can you grab those? And then we also have those little circles that we saved from cutting out our circles from the pie. And I also cut some more with some of our extra pie crust. Can you stick one of those on there? And so if you want to, you don't have to, but you can decorate the top of your pie with extra dots. And then put the egg wash on first so it sticks. And then you can go back in and we'll brush the top of that as well. And then the last step is I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit more of the turbinado sugar over the top of it. You ready to keep brushing it? Yeah. Okay. Time up. All right. Ryan just got the pie decorated with all those little dots that we made. Last step, I'm just take some of the more of that turbinado sugar. I'm just gonna sprinkle a little bit over the top of it. You don't have to do this step, but it just adds a little bit more texture, and it will look really pretty when the pie is done baking.
And it gets more sugar.
It gets more sugar. Anything with more sugar, right?
Yeah.
Probably need to stop baking so much so you're not eating as much sugar.
No,
No.
I like baking. Nothing's gonna stop me from not liking to bake.
I know, I like them too. Okay, and we're ready to put this in the oven now. So my oven is preheated to 400 degrees. Really, really important, you need to put a baking sheet underneath of your pie. I think that's enough. Okay, because you are gonna have some caramel start blossoming out later. You can also have some juices come out of your pie. So really important, so you don't have a huge mess and smoke everywhere. We wanna make sure we put that on a baking sheet. We're gonna put that in a 400 degree oven. After we put the pie in, we're gonna turn the oven down to 375 and set our timer for 45 minutes. And then we'll be ready to see what our pie looks like. At that point, it could take 45 to 60 minutes. You're waiting for the caramel to start blossoming out of the vent holes that you made and for the crust to be nice and golden brown. All right, it's been 45 minutes. Our pie is getting closer. But it's still not quite as golden brown as we want. I don't see anything coming out through the vent holes yet. So we are going to keep baking and checking every 5 minutes. All right, our pie just came out of the oven. You can see in the bottom hole, it's been a little caramel bubbling up in there. The top is nice and golden brown. It looks great. So we really want to cut a piece and eat it, but we are going to wait. We really want to wait about 15 minutes at least and let some of those juices kind of thicken up a little bit. We'll still eat it while it's warm, but we're going to let that cool off for just a little bit, and then we'll get some slices cut. Okay, our pie is done, and it's cooled off a little bit. You can still eat it warm, but like we said just a little bit ago, we need to make sure that we let it cool off just a little bit, let all the juices thicken back up. So we've been patiently waiting all day for this. Right? Not all day, just afternoon. Alright. Looks really flaky, doesn't it? It's like flaking out. On the big piece. Nice and pretty. Alright, so to serve this, we're going to put a scoop of vanilla ice cream on top, and then we're going to drizzle some caramel over the top. Alright, so they just can't wait, they want to keep going. So we'll put a nice scoop of vanilla ice cream on that. I did heat up my caramel just a little bit just to make it to where it will come out a little bit easier and isn't quite so hard. And then we're just going to do a nice drizzle of caramel over the top of all of that. And how is it?
Good.
Yeah. It looks pretty delicious. Good job.
Thanks.
You're not even looking up to say anything.